Despite the business potential of frog farming and its pursuit by many countries, it is still a surprise that Africa, where it's a staple food, is yet to leverage on frog farming. In 2020, New Zealand exported frogs worth $109 million, making it the highest exporter in the world. This is your first agricultural television station in Nigeria. My name is Joshua Ishaya, and guess what? The program is Aqua Farming. Today on Aqua Farming, the program is going to be taking a very different shape. Trust me, it is because we will be looking at the opportunities lying in frog farming business and all you need to know about frogs. Stay tuned. It will seem that frog farming may finally be coming into its own after many decades of little commercial progress. Frogs are cold-blooded animals, so their culture is generally limited to tropical and subtropical regions. But farming activities have been increasing rapidly in many parts of the world. This is generally a sign of efficient and profitable technology and management practices in spite of some recent investment trends in other aquaculture sectors. Nonetheless, land costs, labor costs, prevailing clinic conditions, and value chains all impact the economic feasibility of frog farming, as does competition from poorly regulated harvested of wild frogs. There are two phases involved in frog culture: larva rearing to metamorphosis, followed by grow out to marketable size. Both have significant management issues to contend with, including disease, cannibalism, nutrition, water quality, and sanitation biosecurity. Though frog business is still on a small scale in most countries, it is on the rise in Asia and China. The market, according to Chinese Academy of Engineering, was worth $7 billion in 2020. Marketing, however, determines the market's profitability, which varies from countries to countries and farm to farm. Also, the prices of the frog vary from one species to another. Annually, over $40 million worth of frog legs are sold globally. The top importers of this delicacy are France, Belgium, and the United States, while the major global exporters are Indonesia and China. It is estimated that people eat about 3.2 billion frogs annually worldwide. This excludes household consumption and includes frog farm production. Apart from being a staple food, there is also a market for frog skin. This serves as unique leather. While frog farming has long been pursued in many countries and with a number of species, most of the early research and development efforts focus on the American bullfrog, popularly called little-backed Catasbenus. This species, native to North America, often reaches 20 centimeters in length, with large female laying up to 25,000 eggs at a time. This seems like ideal characteristics for a cultivated species when research trials began in earnest. But feeding soon emerged as a major problem because many frog species, including the American bullfrog, will only feed on live food or whatever they perceive to possibly be alive. Early research using live food for Catasbenus typically resulted in feed conversion of 2.8 to 1 and occasionally higher. Eventually, researchers and producers realized that if they could cause feed pellets to move around in front of frogs' noses by using bubbles, flowing water, or motorized feeding trays, they could fool them into consuming it. Sometimes. The American bullfrog was widely introduced to distant lands over the last century, primarily with an eye towards farming or as a substitute for smaller native species. It is now found in more than 40 countries and is being cultured primarily in South America and Asia. Nonetheless, many government researchers and entrepreneurs across the world had focused on developing cultural techniques for native frogs. Nonetheless, many government researchers and entrepreneurs across the world have focused on developing cultural techniques for native frog species. Some examples include the marsh frog, Peloplerex rhabdodonus in Europe, where farming interest is increasing. The North African green frog, which is undergoing preliminary evaluation, and the giant swamp frog or groove-crowned bullfrog in Burundi and Nigeria. Fortunately, as interest in frog farming spread throughout Asia and Africa, Nigeria to be precise, researchers have found out that live or moving feed problem can be avoided, although with some species such as the tiger frog that eagerly feed on pellets without any need to move them about mechanically. While this species is still referred to by several scientific names, it has emerged as the most adaptable frog for farming in Asia. Now, let's look at the larval culture of frog. Now, let's look at the larval structure of a frog farm. Although their cultural requirements are not dissimilar, some tadpoles can be even less forgiving than many fish species. Larval culture for frogs covers hatching to metamorphosis, the point at which legs are fully formed and the tail completely resorbed. Survival to metamorphosis, size and age of metamorphosis, and overall weight gain during larval culture are important indicators of good. They are important indicators of good or poor management. Temperature, varying density, dissolved minerals, nutrition, and water quality are all major influences on tadpole survival and growth. Luckily, feeding is one aspect of frog culture that is comparatively easy when dealing with the larval stages prior to metamorphosis. While some elaborate diet formulations have been developed for tadpole culture, and commercial thermostater has also been used successfully. Researchers in Nigeria recently reported on the relative performance of tadpoles fed duckweed, purple leaf, and commercial fish feed. The highest feed intake, weight gain, specific growth rate as FCR were all attained with the duckweed diet, with a 90% survival rate and 100% metamorphosis. The researchers attributed these advantages to the high crude protein content and digestibility of the duckweed. Many other recipes for homemade diets have also proven successful. In Nigeria, Metamorphosis rates of H. rugosa were shown to decrease as larval density increased. Time to metamorphosis also increased with density. Froglets from high density treatment were smaller. When tadpoles' food was limited, the time to metamorphosis also increased and froglet size decreased. Similar trends have been reported for other species. Good sanitation is essential in tadpole culture. Avoiding food waste reduces the potential for bacterial diseases. Tanks and should be checked closely several times a day, and any sink or dead animals removed. Tanks or ponds should be thoroughly cleaned and dried between batches, so smooth surfaces are preferred. Now, let's look at the post-metamorphosis grow out. Disease can be common if frogs are raised at high densities, but some species tolerate crowded conditions for better than others. An abundance of potentially pathogenic bacteria can be found in a typical frog farm, especially motile aeromonads. These generally occur in the water that feed on the frogs themselves. Red leg syndrome or bacteria dermatosepticemia is a widespread problem in frog farms and affects many different species around the world. Certain antibiotics can help with this disease, but resistance caused and residue concerns limit this approach. Now, researchers in China have reported that supplemental taurine at 1620 mg body weight can improve immune function and antioxidant activity in captive reguluses, and some other strategies may be imagined to deal with specific bacterial pathogens. Certain bacteria associated with farm frogs are actually beneficial, and researchers in Brazil have identified a number of lactic and bacteria present in Catisbenius culture environment. Lactococcus lactis 1,584 isolated from a bullfrog hatchery inhabited the growth of Citrobacca frondi, a bullfrog pathogen, Alistria monocytogenes. Researchers in several countries, including Nigeria, are working on the enhancing beneficial bacteria associated with frog culture as biological control agents, and probiotics advance in frog nutrition and resulting improvements in reproduction and environment may also reduce diseases problems going forward. Papain supplementation in the diets of farmed frog in Thailand resulted in less waste and improved water quality during grow-outs. Other recent nutrition research has shown that ingredients such as corn gluten meal can be incorporated into frog grow-out ration without reducing survival or weight gain. Refinement of commercial diets for those species inclined to consume them is resulting in improved animal welfare and economic efficiencies. Now, let's look at the genetic and environmental issues. Clearly, concerns associated with the widespread introduction of potentially invasive frog species, such as the American bullfrog, are valid. Additionally, as a result of habitat modification and other anthropogenic phenomena, hybrids between distinct frog species have been reported in recent years in numbers of regions. Some evaluation of hybrids for culture has occurred in Europe and Asia, but results have been mixed and generally native. In Bangladesh, researchers recently reported that one larval hybrid between H. littoralis and H. targarinus developed normally, albeit with somewhat lower viability at metamorphosis. Those involving female reguluses suffered from low survival, and those that did survive metamorphosis exhibited abnormal spermatogenesis. Concerns have also been raised over the translocation of distinct subspecies of H. regulus for farming purposes and potential negative genetic impact that might result. Now, let's look at the market in frog and its demand. Small-scale backyard frog farms still appear to be the norm in most countries, suggesting that management practices and value chains have not yet reached the point where significant economies of scale come into play. But this is beginning to change across Africa. In 2017, the Chinese Academy of Engineering estimated the value of the country's frog farming industry was over $7 billion. Marketing arrangements still appear to influence the profitability of most producers, and these can vary considerably from the country to another and from one farm to another. Dress carcass yield of farm frog species vary, but the value of approximately 50% is typical. The rear leg generally account for half the carcass's weight. Some market also exists for frog skin as a specialty leather. Western consumers are often only familiar with frog's legs as an edible product, but it is more common to see the whole dress carcasses marketed and consumed in other parts of the world. White frogs provide a number of environmental services, not the least of which is the control of many agricultural pests. Consumption of frogs is expanding in many countries, especially Nigeria. At the same time, wild harvests of most edible species have become unsustainable, so it is probably a safe bet that frog farming will grow in the coming years, with benefit accruing for consumers, producers, and the environment. Frogs are among the most traded species of wildlife. Its utilization. Now, let's look at frog in Ibadan, Nigeria state. Frogs are among the most threatened species of wildlife. It utilizes in Ibadan. A major depot in western Nigeria was therefore conducted with the aim of assessing the forms and trend of use, and amongst others reasons for frog meat consumption. Data from the study were collected through questionnaire, in-depth interviews, and field observation. The questionnaire were administered randomly to 50 frog consumers from each of the two selected local government areas, while all traders, 27 who sell frogs for medical purposes, were also interviewed. Data collected were summarized using descriptive statistics. Results show that only 35.0% of the respondents utilized frog for other purposes apart from consumption. Among these few respondents, 94.3% use it for medical purposes. Frog species used for medical purposes include Amatophrenetus regularis, Thermopetena cretoptotus, and Pychidena mascarensis. All these respondents, 100% by the frogs utilized, have knowledge of the sellers and were unaware of the farms in Nigeria. All the respondents, 100%, consider frog meat desirable and preferable when dried. Almost all the respondents have consumed frog meat more than 10 times. Majority of these respondents, 65.0%, consume frog because of its nutritional value, while few ate it due to economic reasons. Most respondents, 77.0%, prefer the meat for its flavor and consume it whole, 78.0%. Frog meat sold for 100 naira is most preferred by respondents. Majority of the respondents buy frog meat once a week, but utilize it twice a week or once a week. However, 70% of the respondents will buy more frogs if they had more money. Majority of those respondents are unwilling to engage in frog farming. Okay, now let's talk about how does a frog reproduce or reproduces. How does a frog reproduce? Reproduction is necessary for any animal species to exist, and amphibians such as frogs are no different. But how do frogs reproduce and make more of themselves? How does their life cycle play out? How can frogs give live birth, or how do they only lay eggs? Do they only lay eggs? It turns out the answer to these questions are a bit more complicated than most would initially believe. Most frogs use external fertilization, in which a female and male release their eggs and sperm around the same time. A handful of species use internal fertilization instead. In that case, a male will fertilize a female eggs internally, and then the female lay the fertilized eggs later around them. They have finished developing. Female frogs can reproduce thousands of eggs per year. They retain them in their bodies until it's time to mate. If she does not mate with a male and her eggs does not get fertilized, they die off inside her body. Most frogs seek out mates sometimes in spring or summer once per year. They will typically gather in large numbers in a very moist environment and find a mate to engage in amplexures with. Amplexures involve a male and female frog clinging tightly to one another's bodies for many hours or even days at a time. At some point, the female frog will release sperm from his cloaca and either fertilize the female eggs internally or externally. Afterwards, the two frogs will release and go their separate ways. After a female frog eggs have been fertilized, they will develop inside of a body for a certain period of time. In most species, the female frog will lay their eggs in a moist environment where they will continue to develop for everywhere from a few days to a few weeks before they hatch. However, a handful of other species eggs developing inside the female body, in that case, should give live birth to either froglets or tadpoles after the eggs hatch inside her body. Overall live birth is fairly rare amongst frogs, but it is not completely unheard of. In order for a frog to give live birth, a male must fertilize the female eggs internally. After they are fertilized by a male's sperm, the eggs will develop inside her body until they hatch. Not all species that use internal fertilization give live birth. Many still lay eggs. Currently, there are 13 unknown species of frog within the Nyctophrynoids genus that give birth to live froglets. Additionally, there is one species that gives birth to tadpoles instead, which researchers discovered in 2015 in Indonesia rainforest. Perhaps the most unusual method of reproduction amongst frogs involved the Suriname toad. When a male Surinamian toad locates a female, he attaches to her in the typical amplexus fashion. The female and male toads will release their sperm and eggs at the same time, resulting in external fertilization. This is where the thing gets weird. After the male fertilizes the female eggs, he will push them onto her back, where they will stick to her body. Soon after, she will grow a proactive layer of skin over the eggs on her back. The eggs then develop while attached on her until it still hatch in a grotesque yet fascinating event. The babies burst out of the female's back. The vast majority of frog species undergo all four distinct life stages. However, some species, include many that use external fertilization, bypass the tadpole stage entirely. In the case, instead of laying her eggs, the female will retain them and allow them to develop inside her body. She will eventually give birth to live froglets when her eggs have finished developing. Alternatively, some species that skip the tadpole stage, like the cuckoo frog, lay their eggs on the land rather than in water. Since these frogs' young start their lives on land, they begin their lives as froglets and with limbs that rather than tadpoles. have come to the end of this episode of the program, Aqua Farming. My name is Joshua Ishaya, thanking you for watching. Bye for now.